Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Rita Roy, CEO of the National Spine Health Foundation and host of the Get Back to It podcast. Here, we share real stories of healing and recovery from people who've overcome spine problems and returned to the lives they love. These success stories are powerful, inspiring, and sometimes unbelievable. Let's get back to it. At the Get Back to It podcast, our mission is to share the stories of spinal champions, individuals navigating spine conditions while striving for better quality of life. Today's guest is Jonathan Carter, an Army Staff Sergeant who began experiencing persistent shoulder blade pain in his early 20s. What initially seemed like posture-related strain gradually evolved into cervical degenerative disc disease with radiculopathy, ultimately requiring a 2-level cervical fusion. Jonathan's story highlights delayed diagnosis, the physical demands of military leadership, and the discipline required to rebuild not just strength, but trust in your body. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here today. Your spine issues didn't begin with a dramatic injury, which I think makes your story really relatable for a lot of our listeners. Take us back to when you first noticed something wasn't right.
So it all started in early 2020. I was 23 on active duty as a junior soldier at the time, and I developed a persistent pain under my right shoulder blade. It wasn't sharp or dramatic. It just never really went away. At the time, I chalked it up to posture or a more sedentary lifestyle that I'd been used to. After the initial flurry of basic training and the technical training that followed, I found myself at a desk working long, high-stress shifts on a watch floor. I tried rest, physical therapy, over-the-counter meds, but nothing really fixed it. It slowly became part of my everyday life, and given how low impact my job at the time was compared to what a lot of more combat-focused soldiers deal with every day, there just didn't seem to be much reason for me to think that something more serious was going on.
That's a really important point, how easy it is to rationalize pain, especially when you're young and active. When did you start to realize that this might be something more than just posture strain?
By August of 2022, things had definitely shifted. The pain started radiating from my lower neck down both arms, and at its worst, it radiated up into my head. I also noticed clumsiness in my hands, especially my left hand. I was dropping things or kind of unintentionally tossing them as I was walking. At first, I wrote those off as fatigue or distraction, and I didn't really tell my doctors about it. In fact, it was only in retrospect, pretty recently even, that I realized it was something that I should have brought up much sooner. What really made it stop feeling normal at the time was the radiating pain. Up until then, I'd been told this was a soft tissue issue, so having symptoms show up in multiple places just didn't add up. I was also worried about what a more serious diagnosis could mean for my military career, which made it easier to dismiss.
Jonathan, it sounds like you were really trying to manage this while also protecting your career, which so many people can probably relate to. So what did the next phase of treatment look like?
Over the next couple of years, I was in and out of intensive physical therapy and relied on prescription muscle relaxers and anti-inflammatories just to get through the day. In 2023, I was fortunate, and I had been stationed somewhere with good access to care and a leadership team that really supported me. Some treatments helped, things like scraping, helped reduce the tension, and exercises from physical therapy let me function normally most of the time if I was careful about form. The medication side was a little harder. Muscle relaxers affected my alertness at work, but through trial and error, I found something manageable. An early MRI did show cervical disc degeneration at the time, but it wasn't labeled as chronic, so our treatment stayed conservative.
And all of this was happening while you were taking on one of the most physically demanding leadership roles in the Army, serving as a drill sergeant responsible for the training of new soldiers. That could not have been easy.
It was definitely hard at times, and that period lined up directly with my symptoms getting worse. Being a drill sergeant was very different than the watch floors I was used to. It meant long days on my feet, constant movement, and honestly, more pressure than I expected despite having some very stressful assignments early on in my career. We were a small team responsible for training hundreds of soldiers, and there just wasn't much room to slow down. I've never been someone who hides from things like this, even like hiding it from my junior soldiers. I'm usually pretty open with them. I think it's important for the next generation to learn from our mistakes. So, I shared what was going on with them and my colleagues, specifically about the pain I was dealing with. Rather, it's hard to take the step back I probably should have at the time. There's a mystique where you're expected to uphold as a drill sergeant, but pretending to be infallible just doesn't really help anyone, I found. Some of our work days could stretch as long as 24 hours, and sleep was hard to come by at times. Looking back, I think the lack of recovery from long, frequent hours absolutely made my symptoms worse.
It's remarkable that you found a way to lean into an endurance sport during all of this. Wow, you actually started competing in triathlons. Tell us about that.
Sure. So while serving as a drill, I started endurance training, hoping that the structured, like mostly low impact work that kind of goes into that sort of thing would help. And more than anything, it also gave me kind of a sense of control when my body was feeling pretty unpredictable at the time. There were days I aggravated my symptoms, but overall, especially as swimming, I definitely felt better. Part of it was proving to myself and, maybe a few coworkers too, that I was still capable and ready to perform, even if I wasn't lifting the big weights at PT or rucking during every field training. Endurance training also made me much more aware of my body day to day, and especially of tools like my Whoop band, which thanks Dad for that one, and a Garmin watch giving me objective feedback throughout the training that helped a ton.
I'm just in awe of all that you were going through and asking of your body and your mind and pushing through all of that. That sense of control that you described is so powerful. But in July of 2025, things took a pretty serious turn for you.
They did. So while I managed to kind of control my symptoms while I was on the trail as a drill, we call it, after completing those 2 years, I was reassigned to serve as a platoon sergeant in an intelligence unit on the East Coast. And shortly after that move, I went to what should have been just a routine, team event at a trampoline park. I'm a little older than some of my soldiers, but the guy I was replacing was there, and he's older than me, and he was having fun with them. So I figured I'd be okay, and it just didn't occur to me. But anyways, 2 days later, I woke up in like some of the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. And a little more scary even than that, I couldn't lift my left arm that is past like horizontal. It was completely different than anything I'd experienced before. It was frankly terrifying. And I went straight to the ER. I was out of work for the rest of the week, and I was placed on a like pretty heavy medication regime, including oxycodone and Valium, which definitely came with its own challenges. Valium is now on the list of things I won't take from the doctors anymore.
Wow, that sounds so incredibly frightening, going from functioning to suddenly not being able to lift your arm. And that's when imaging finally gave you some real answers.
Yep, it did. And so while I was in the AER, they took a new MRI, and that new MRI confirmed degenerative disc disease with the cervical radial I can never pronounce this one right.
Radiculopathy. I don't even know why we use that word. We should just say nerve pain.
So the cervical radiculopathy, we're going to leave it with that, I guess.
That sounds good.
And after years of symptoms and limited results from the conservative treatment, it was a relief to finally have a name, even if I can't pronounce it, for what was happening. And at the same time, it was still stressful thinking about what it might mean for my career and my personal life. Thankfully, I was at my current duty station now, and the orthopedic team here is just very, very well regarded, a really good team, and I was ready to stop spinning my wheels. So I spoke with some other soldiers and even actually a fellow firefighter around that time who'd gone through the surgery for similar issues twice. And that perspective helped a lot. And so we moved quickly towards surgery after that.
Having a name for what you're experiencing after years of uncertainty, that's huge. And especially when the news is hard and you're faced with now the decision to have surgery after so many years of dealing with this. Let's talk about the surgery itself.
Sure. So on December 15th, 2025, I underwent a 2-level C5 to C7 anterior cervical discectomy infusion. So I'd never had a major surgery before. Going into it, my biggest concern from the research I'd done was the procedure itself and making sure it went well. My understanding was pretty much as long as you make it through the surgery itself, okay, and you do the right stuff for recovery, it's pretty much smooth sailing, or as much as it can be after a major surgery. I did have a lot of confidence in the surgical team, like I mentioned. I asked them a lot of detailed questions about their experience and outcomes, tons of questions. And once I felt comfortable with them and with the surgery itself, what I ended up dreading wasn't even the operation, it was the slow return to sport afterward. The pain following surgery was actually like even less than I expected. I still can't quite believe that I didn't feel and don't feel any pain from the 6 screws they put into my vertebra or even the incision, which is still like pretty present on my neck right now. What stood out more was the stiffness, a sore throat, and muscle tension. I was on 30 days of convalescent leave from the Army, and largely homebound during that time. Thankfully, I had family that flew in to help me out for the first couple of weeks, which made a huge difference because there's some weight restrictions on lifting, and you're supposed to kind of stay not quite bedridden, but minimal exercise for the time.
I just wanted to comment on that because movement is good for you when you're convalescing, but limited movement with that ACDF, right? And not lifting heavy objects and taking it easy. But walking is always good, and walking is good for recovery. So that's amazing that you had a support system around you. Let's talk a little bit about making the informed decision, right? And it sounds like going in with information made a real difference to your mindset and your sense of confidence in how the surgery was going to go. That has a lot to do with how you do after surgery. And it's amazing because when people go into surgery with an expectation of what recovery is like, there are actually a lot of studies that show that expectation can actually assist and aid in recovery. Let's talk about your recovery.
Sure. So the arm and pain and the hand clumsiness resolved like very quickly. It's still hard for me to kind of express, but the tactile feeling in my hands is much stronger than it was, I think, previous to surgery. But you don't really realize it, I guess, when you're losing it before surgery, because it's such a slow decline. But once it comes back quickly, it's definitely noticeable. The muscle tension and headaches have taken a bit longer, but physical therapy has helped with those a lot with the suboccipital muscles and everything. I started physical therapy in February 2026, with the primary focus being on proper posture and a metered return to endurance sport. Nowadays, I'm back to full-time work, daily light workouts, but rebuilding that full athletic capacity has been a bit more gradual. Like you said, the walking during recovery has been super important. And so that kind of has led to now, I guess, future endeavors. Well, I think we're going to get into in a moment.
Well, I just can't believe you're talking about February 26th, and today is, middle of March of 26. So that's like 5 weeks ago. And I'm looking at somebody at the screen who looks absolutely like the perfect picture of fitness and health and youth and vitality. I cannot even believe that you just went through the surgery and you're just coming out of physical therapy. It's absolutely incredible. It's just absolutely incredible progress. Such a short time. The days are long. I'm sure the days are short. The weeks are long, and you're not stopping here. So I hear that you are walking the Country Mile, which is a 100-mile ultra marathon. When is that going to happen? And what does that say about where you are seeing yourself now in this recovery phase?
So the Country Mile, like I said, it's a 100-mile ultra marathon. It's scheduled for April 3rd through 5th, and it's out on a strawberry farm.
What? That's next month.
Yes, yeah, coming up very soon.
Wait, so your surgery was early December?
Yeah, mid-December, December 15th. So it's a very short turnaround. So later. In my defense, it's 100 miles, but it's a 4-mile loop. And so you can stop and rest whenever you want. You could just like cut it kind of at any point. So that
kind of sounds long, 4 months after surgery.
I have been walking like once I got out of the initial stages where even the walking was kind of limited. Walking has definitely been a big thing for me being, I'm naturally pretty high energy. So it helps a lot. It helps clear my head, especially, with work and everything. And I have a very nosy dog who likes to walk too. But anyways, I've had an incredible team, kind of to help me get this far along, both on the medical and the personal side of things. They've been absolutely invaluable. And the ultra, as much as it is about, trying to get 100 miles, even if I don't get 50 miles, At the end of the day, it's really kind of about rebuilding that trust in my body. After the fusion surgery, there's definitely the psychological piece, learning that you're not fragile. The walking, like I kind of mentioned, served as a really healthy outlet for my energy so far, which did dip really hard after surgery. But even just these past maybe 3-4 weeks has come back up to kind of where it was before. So you kind of have to learn how to, if you're high energy like me, manage that, while still staying within the bounds of, my, like we call it a profile in the military, but my physical restrictions, basically.
Yeah. It's a really beautiful way to frame what you're doing. And for those who do not know, I guess we can share that outside of your professional career, you are also an athlete and ambassador for the Ironman Foundation. So that really does, sort of underscore your endurance, your love for endurance sport. And so let's just talk a little bit about how that experience has shaped the way that you show up in that role.
Honestly, there's probably too many ways to count right now. As an Ironman Foundation ambassador, I of course compete in the Ironman triathlons. They consist of very long swims, bikes, and run events. That's all completed back to back. If anyone's not familiar, the format of triathlon. Ambassadors, we take things like even a step further than your typical Ironman, and we use our day-to-day training events and the races themselves, of course, to raise awareness and funds that help the Ironman Foundation support initiatives that break down barriers to sport, health, and opportunity. We seek to empower underserved youth and community across the country. This year, our big initiative actually is the Swim Ready program, which provides training to children who might not otherwise have access to safe swim training, where they reside or, due to various factors. With my diagnosis and the surgery, it's really changed how I think about resilience, which is obviously a huge part of being a successful Ironman or, really any kind of endurance athlete. As a career soldier, I've always believed in discipline and toughness. And, we really get that kind of instilled in us with being a drill sergeant. But resilience, it also means recognizing when something isn't right and slowing down early enough to protect long-term health. As I mentioned before, I've always been open with my soldiers and, my coworkers and family. But now I definitely talk much more directly about the early warning signs like persistent pain, numbness, and changes in coordination. Ignoring those or kind of writing them off like I did, it just doesn't keep you in the fight the way many think it might do for you. Really, it's just kind of delays good decision making. And for anyone who thinks they're too removed from the risk of traumatic injury or too fit for spine issues, I was that person. It's not toughness or even perfect preparation that protects you in the end. Like I've lifted throughout my career, but my sister is on Team USA for weightlifting, top weight. She's taught me my form and stuff. I'm pretty good on top of that stuff. And I ended up having back problems. So really it's recognizing the problems early and taking them seriously, no matter how prepared you think you are when they started.
That's such an incredibly valuable message. Clearly one that you feel called to share. And we have an initiative called Operation Spine Strong. And it's an initiative geared towards service members. And one of the things in that initiative is really encouraging soldiers to recognize pain and do something about it. Because there are times when you just sort of wait it out, see if it gets better. It's a temporary thing. You've pulled something, but if it's persisting for a long time, it could be the sign of something more serious. And when you delay treatment, you run the risk of permanent nerve damage, right? You run the risk of limiting what your options are for recovery. So, we want to tell people don't deny those symptoms and take care of it, before it becomes a long-term problem. And I think, as you are sharing so honestly and vulnerably your story, what would you want someone listening today to take away from your story?
So I guess like for anyone listening, I really can't overstate that I had taken really good care of myself up until my symptoms started. I've always had a very athletic lifestyle. Parents made sure of that. But, I was also very vigilant to never overdo it. Like I said, my sister's a weightlifter, essentially a professional weightlifter. And she always taught me proper progression and form and everything. but and the importance of ample rest days even. I sought medical care early and regularly, throughout the process. But medicine, and athletics too, are they're fields of analysis, I guess, like any other. Assessments are only as good as the data you have available to you and your care team at any given time. And, I'd say if I could go back to 2020, I would tell myself not to be afraid to share the coordination issues I was having, to ask the doctors harder questions and push for better information, whether that meant asking for a second MRI or just to have a second opinion on the existing imaging. I hope listeners can take away that advocating for yourself doesn't have to imply distrust in your doctors or your care team. It means partnering with them. The earlier you get accurate information, the more you share from, no matter how benign you think it might be, or, how in your head, like I thought it was, the better your chances of protecting your long-term health. If this conversation today kind of helps somebody recognize that sooner, it'll all be worth it.
Jonathan, your story is so amazing and your words of wisdom are just so on point. I feel like, telling our listeners, we did not tell you to say any of these things because you're telling the stories that we want to tell, that, there's good news out there in spine care. Don't ignore symptoms. Find a care team that you trust, do your homework so that you feel ready for what your recovery requirements are going to be. Surround yourself with a support team to get through it. It's like you did all the right things. You're the poster child of that success story. And I'm so honored and delighted to be talking to you. And not to mention that I thank you for your service. I mean, there's that component on there that, we so want to reach out to our military and veterans community because we know that spine conditions are prevalent. And, you put yourselves in unique situations, whether it's, rucking or, heavy equipment that you're carrying or in confined spaces for long periods of time, or just all the different things that you demand of your body as an athlete soldier. And so we want to get the news out to folks that are serving our country. We want to serve them as best we can as well. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, navigating that journey in military medicine. I loved what you said about, asking questions of your doctors doesn't mean that you're second guessing them. It means that you want to learn more and you want to know more. And many of the doctors who we work with will say they never feel bad if a patient wants a second opinion. They encourage a second opinion because they want their patients to be confident in where they are. They want that doctor-patient relationship that feels good for everybody. And they want to feel as good about it as you do. So they highly encourage that to happen. What did that look like being an active duty member of the military? How did you navigate the sort of care pathways that you had available to you?
So I think the earliest that kind of outside providers started to come in was when I first was referred to pain management. It was actually the first person to really realize, at least early on, like the root of the issues was a civilian pain management doctor. And I was referred off post to them simply because while I had a great team where I was, we didn't have pain management as part of our like medical system on the base. Yeah. So they referred me out for him. And so that was pretty typical, just, your specialty referral. But for getting the second opinion when it came to the surgery, that was just a kind of like we said, like being comfortable enough with my provider to kind of partner up with them. And despite, the information they'd be giving me, say, doc, I'd really appreciate it if we could, farm these images out and just see, what somebody else might have to say on it. So they referred me to a specialty clinic here in town, somebody with a kind of similar education level to my own doctor and, similar background. And I mean, one factoid about Dr. Jackson, the doctor who did my surgery is, he says he does this surgery about I think it's 48 times a year or something about there, or, somewhere it's right around like one a week, pretty close. So, he's pretty well practiced in it. And I've found over the years, I guess, being involved with military medicine, it's usually not your care team that ever puts up the barrier. Sometimes it's TRICARE, Humana, the back end of things. But, as a drill, actually, we saw this a lot with the soldiers. You can work through most of those issues. It might just take a bit of doing. So, sometimes just that resiliency kind of we talked about, I guess, being resilient when you're dealing with, the TRICARE, the financial side of that stuff, as long as you stick with it and you work with your care team, like I said, it might take some doing, but you can usually get to where you need to be in the end. The system is not designed to let us down. It's just maybe just a bit bureaucratic, like all of government.
Yeah. And I think, you say that so beautifully. You just, keep the resilience and don't give up. But I think, one of the things, and to your credit, is that that's especially hard to do when you're in pain, right? I mean, I think that's one of the things that people feel is that I just want this to end. What do I need to do? Get it done, right? And yet it is your spine. And oftentimes there's not a one solution pathway, that there can be choices to be made. And so, you've got to kind of educate yourself on that. You've got to make sure you're making the right decision. And that takes some time. And meanwhile, you don't feel good. So you're sort of like, I don't feel good. I just want to get this done with. Someone just fix it. But wait a second, I better make sure I'm doing the right thing, because I'm not going to get more than maybe 1 or 2 shots on my spine. So, that just takes a bit. Yeah. It's good for you. I mean, just sticking with that. The surgeons that you met with so I guess the turning point for you to go from conservative treatment to surgery was, should we blame it on the trampoline?
It was pretty much the trampolines. I think so. Cause there was I'll tell you even though I personally thought surely something, more here is going on, and, there's, for lack of a better phrase, like something kinetic, or I guess more, something hands-on we could do other than trying to just, medicate the pain away, and beyond just like physical therapy, which I'd been doing for a couple of years at the time. It was really just that not being able to lift the left arm that was like a whoa, for me, and I think, for the providers, because up until, the one thing my doctor always said is, we won't do surgery for the pain. Because, with the surgery, there's too high a chance that, you come back out and you're experiencing pain. But once there's degradation, of the, of your control or your nerves or whatever, right? Yeah. That tactile stuff, then, that's where we start to action it. And that's why I, wish I'd been more upfront, I think, about the throwing stuff. And even at the time when I first mentioned it to him, I was still like, I don't know, maybe it's still just in my head. But now post-surgery, I haven't thrown a single thing. I haven't dropped anything like that. And it's like, I guess that was associated,
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That radiculopathy, pain, numbness, weakness.
It's a very, very unique feeling that I still, the soldiers ask me, what is nerve pain? What is the nerve? Aren't the nerves what send the pain? Like and it's still, I have a very hard time explaining to them, quite what it felt like. But I did know that when I started the Lyrica, because even the gabapentin didn't quite help, but the pre-GABA did help quite a bit for me. That once it went away, it was like, oh, I didn't realize I wasn't supposed to be feeling that. Huh.
Yeah. Yeah. And was that something that they talked about, that you would have to take the medication for a long period of time or a short period of time, or what was the discussion around that?
So the hope was, I think, because they didn't really start giving me the gabapentin until it was right after that incident at the trampoline park and after the week of, oxycodone and the Vicodin, which, they were supposed to work as a muscle relaxer, but it just mentally had me all over the place. So after that appointment, when I went back in to really see the specialty provider for the first time after like the ER visit, that's where gabapentin first came up. And so we tried that. I think they titrated me to a slightly higher level. But before, it's one of those weird things where, you can raise the dose and it kind of works conversely. I guess, you guys would know more about that than me.
Right.
So they switched me over to the pre-GABA, given that it does have, that 1-for-1 kind of relation to dose size or amount, rather, I guess, to strength. And that was like an overnight difference. I had poor sleep for as long as I could remember. And as soon as I started taking that, I was sleeping like a baby. It was unreal. And it's again one of those things where it's like I had no idea that that's what was causing it. And for years I tried to figure out like, and I do everything like, lights off at 6 o'clock, no caffeine after
Wow.
2, and it was just the chatter in my neck, I guess, was keeping me up and I just could never really pin it down.
Wow. That's incredible. And so it just, it was just such an insidious thing with you where it just kind of crept up over a lifetime almost like back to your teenage years, right? Is that
Oh, almost, yeah. So even like when I was still in initial military training, there was one point where I was having some issues with my thumbs specifically. Like they were both, and this is maybe this is pure conjecture on my part. So anyone listening, if you're like that doesn't make medical sense at all, I am not a doctor, so take this with a grain of salt. But there, I woke up one day and I'd been having a lot of stress at the school. I wasn't doing very well at the language school at the time, and all of a sudden my thumbs would start like popping out of like almost as if I had carpal tunnel. And when I went to stick my hand in my pocket or something, and then if I put my hand back by my back, like, there's a bunch of weird stuff. And they sent me to a specialist, and they looked all at my muscles, like took a bunch of X-rays.
did they
They
look at your neck at that time?
they never looked at my neck. And so looking back, I think that was maybe the first instance of it. Now knowing that it affected these fingers, right? Of it, and it's like, oh my, that was 8 years ago. And so it just crept and crept and crept, and it's just crazy. Yeah. They never thought to look at the neck, not once. It was the wrists and the arms. And that was about the extent of it. Cause I'd never had, super forceful. I mean, I did actually, I'd been hit by a car once or twice as a kid on the bike, but like never anything that sent me to the hospital right then, at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing about degenerative disc disease is that, and we call it a disease. It's really a condition where the discs, get worn down, and just depending on your anatomy, it doesn't necessarily always require a surgery. So, taking that conservative approach is the right thing. The question is how long, if you're taking medications and you're taking very serious medications for that, how long will that course of, medication treatment go on? And if you are a candidate for surgery and the surgery is going to fix it and be definitive, maybe that's a better course than, repeated
Exactly.
medications.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. I think to your last question, I never quite got there. So the hope with the Lyrica is they only really started prescribing it to me, that and the gabapentin, when they did that. Right. But when we already had decided to move towards surgery, and we were just kind of in that pre-operational window.
Yeah.
And I did stop taking the gabapentin, or the pre-GABA rather, I guess the Lyrica, 3 or 4 weeks ago now, I think.
Okay.
And I'm still never slept better. I did go get a Maloof pillow with a shoulder cutout that is also helping a ton with a little bit of shoulder soreness. Because I kind of became a side sleeper through this whole process somehow. But yeah, I'm now off those. And that was the goal with the surgery is, especially because there are side effects to the Lyrica and everything.
Yeah.
And especially interactions with other medications I already take for a learning disability and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's definitely much better. I'm glad we were able to do something like kind of once and for all. And that was the decision too. So when I got that second opinion on the surgery, the other surgeon wanted to do a hybrid procedure where they would fuse the single level and then do the
Like a disc replacement.
yeah, thank you, the disc replacement at the next level. But the conversation was, I guess the disc replacements, they don't last forever. The jury's still kind of out on, for at least for each specific design, how long they do last. And I'm so young, is it better to fuse now and it's set for life, or, do the replacement and maybe 15, 20 years from now I'm doing the fusion again anyways, and I'm a little older, recovery's a little harder. And so we opted to just go with kind of the fusion just because it had a longer track record, kind of medically speaking of, and we know the outcome rate. Like once it's set, as long as there's nothing that requires, rescission surgery, then, you're pretty much good to go.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting that you were offered, those different treatment options, and that's good that you were offered those options, and you can make a decision, and a choice on what you want to have done. Were those, was that in military medicine, or were those external
So the double fusion that came from Dr. Jackson, my like normal provider for this at the orthopedic health clinic here on the base. And the hybrid procedure, that was a civilian doctor that I'd been referred to,
Mm-hmm.
who took a look and just based on his own practices, kind of recommended that.
What base are you on, Jonathan?
So I'm here at Fort Gordon in Augusta, Georgia.
Okay. All right, cool. That's amazing. Where did you find your best sources of information when you were trying to learn about neck problems and neck conditions? And I found
Honestly,
their website along the
well,
way.
so actually I'm a pretty, I wouldn't say super user. I'm a pretty heavy user of things like Chat GPT. And given my like educational background growing up, I went to a great school. I've always loved science and been good at kind of the scientific method, I guess. And I'm definitely a fact checker. I'm a hardcore fact checker, right? Due to my job, it's something I've become very good at. So I actually use ChatGPT a fair bit to at least get me kind of like you would with like Wikipedia growing up, at least for me, you write a paper, you go to Wikipedia to find your sources since you can't.
Right. Though you weren't supposed to, but we all did anyway.
Yeah, you weren't supposed to, right? But same thing kind of ChatGPT, I'd have it kind of lead me in the right direction and then start looking at those sources. Unfortunately, I had not came across the National Spine Health Foundation ahead of time. And looking back, I really wish I had. I forget which episode it was, but I was listening to the young lady who came on the podcast just like this. And I listened to her story and I was like, oh my God, A, this is the same things I was going to say. So that's not good. B, I can't believe how similar her experience was. And man, if I'd heard that like a couple years ago, that would have been very beneficial to know, because she had the same kind of cycle of delayed diagnosis and kind of second guessing yourself, because the nerve, it's so hard. Like I still can't describe the nerve pain.
Is it just kind of slowly comes on and then all of a sudden, things are
Yeah, you don't realize it almost until it's gone what it was.
Right.
So it's very, very difficult to pin down. But yeah, I wish the National Spine Health Foundation had been one of those resources. But it was usually, friends who'd had the surgery. Like I said, I'm in a volunteer fire department. One of my firefighter friends had the surgery twice. Yeah, so he's got a vertical and horizontal incision. And then and speaking of the incision, it is kind of funny. After surgery, when you're walking around, aside from the neck brace, it's almost like a calling card having the little incision. And you will have folks come up to you, usually older folks, who are like, oh, like, when did you get it done? And they know exactly what surgery you had just based on the location of the scar, which will eventually fade, I'm told.
It will.
So it is funny, there's you get
so
called
common,
out from across
right?
the room.
100 million Americans have a neck or back problem, and yet we don't talk about it enough in our society. We don't hear about it. It's not in the vernacular. It's not in the public conversation or the dialogue about health and wellness. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to share these stories, to connect people, and to talk more about what you need to do. And I had a fusion. I put it off for 10 years. I didn't want to have back surgery because everything I heard was bad. And, I remember going to my surgeon and I was getting foot drop at the time. So I was getting paralysis because pain was not going to be the motivator. I can put up with pain, but, the paralysis, that was freaking me out. And the surgeon said to me, we can fix bones. We can't really fix nerves. So once that nerve is damaged, going to be tough to get nerve, function back, but we can fix the bones. We can do the carpentry on that and save the nerve. So we got to do that on you. And I was like, oh man, that just resonated with me.
I completely understand that. So my mom, she's been a hospice nurse for 20 years. She's an ER nurse or a bit before that. So medical community for a really long time, largely working with older patients, should be pretty savvy with the back stuff. And that was probably the biggest kind of blocking issue between me and surgery at first was, my parents, being that I'm so young, putting up a wall when I was talking to them about it because they didn't think that it was, they didn't quite understand what you just said about the once the nerves, are impinged to a certain degree, even if you fix the restriction, they might not recover. And so that was the biggest thing I had to try and find evidence of and convince them. Like I was going on
Yeah.
like NIHS and finding studies and stuff to refer them
Wow.
to show, hey, like, no, I get it. Like, it is a big step, but if we don't act sooner than later, it might reach a point where even if we did, it's too late now. There is a point where inaction is just as bad as, anything else.
Yeah. That's such a good point. And so kind of following that line, we don't think of young people getting spine conditions, right? And so I think that there can be a stigma around that. And so, what would your advice be to young service members or even athletes, young people who think that they're too young to have a spine problem?
I guess, if any of this resonates with you, go see your doctor. It's can't guarantee they'll give you an MRI. I think I talked about it with Alex before. One of the other folks I've been working with at the National Spine Health Foundation. They did a study kind of recently where if they gave everyone an MRI, right, it'd come back like 80% false positive or something.
80%
Right. So
of
it's
people will have, yep.
yeah, exactly. So it's not the end all be all, unfortunately. But
Off an image. That's for sure.
yeah, but all you can do is talk to your doctor and at least get the train rolling, because like you said, it took you 10 years to finally get to surgery. It took me almost, if we think the thumb thing really was associated to it, 8 years, I guess. And the weird thing is, you can still be pretty functional during that, right? Like I still did the Ironmans and stuff. Like, in fact, that helped a lot of the time. So it's kind of that weird thing where, staying active can help as, or hurt. It just depends on the person.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and I was one of those people where it was probably the sitting, with my neck down, staring at a computer, tech neck kind of thing that did me in the long run, and maybe a bit of genetics. And, the activity helped, but for somebody else, maybe it was an acute athletic injury or what have you, so you just have to kind of listen to your body. And, if you think there could be an issue, get it checked out. I mean, we're thankfully not in the army of yesteryear where, if you're injured, and you say something about it, they're going to, view you differently for it. Nowadays, we've got a pretty good culture of, hey, if you recognize there's a problem, take the knee, drink some water, see doc, and, try and get it dealt with before we turn a mountain or a molehill into a mountain,
Yeah. Yeah. That's so great to know that culture exists across the services, and so important. And, you with your leadership can instill that culture as well. And so thank you for doing that. That's amazing. I just want to close a little bit with talking about your Ironman Foundation participation. You mentioned that earlier, and we haven't talked about that. That's so wonderful that you're doing that. We're so pleased and proud of the work that you're doing. It's so awesome to talk with you about that. Can you tell us just a little more how you got involved and what excited you about participating there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'd gotten into triathlons, shorter ones mainly, what we call like a sprint size or super sprint, which is something you could do kind of at your local pool. And maybe like, it's 12-mile bike at the longest usually, and slowly crept up over the course of a year or two towards the Ironman distance events. And so far to date, I've done the Ironman 70.3 here in Augusta. This year, I've got the Ironman 70.3 planned along with Boise, which will actually be on my birthday in July.
Wow.
And then the Fool down in Florida. And, that's all on top of this 100-mile walk too.
Oh my gosh.
But I got into the foundation because it was a great opportunity they say, race for more. Like the races were fun, and crossing that finish line is really fun, but it's also really cool when you get to say, because I'm not some super athlete. I'm a pretty mid athlete as far as these things are concerned. Very
That's
middle.
all relative.
Yeah, it is very relative, right? But what I can say is that I was the top fundraiser last year for Augusta, and I raised over $2,500 for the foundation. This year, I'm hoping to do far better than that. If I can put the hours in and get the word out. So That, is kind of a cool, a little brag in its own right. Even if you can't win the race, you can win the fundraising.
Yes.
And it's really a fantastic group of people, right from the jump. They assign you an ambassador. So, what I'm doing this year when you're an athlete. And the ambassador will reach out to you. We'll help you with training if you need it. Help you with nerves, if that's an issue. And then help you with the fundraising portion of it as well, because all the ambassadors have fundraised before with some degree of success. And some of the ambassadors, they're just fantastic people. I think one of the guys, Tom, is you might even know who he is. He's like a pediatric doctor out of Boston who's got like 100,000 followers on Facebook or something.
Gosh, awesome.
And he dedicates his time to doing this with the foundation. Everyone's got really cool stories. We're all from all over the place, even all over the world. A couple of folks from South America on the team this year. And it's just, it's a really cool group that, spans the country. And, by virtue of the fact we're all over the place is a great group for me to be connected with, being that I do move pretty often. That's a national group that I'll always be connected with now. And so I did it really for the support with the racing and, just to bring even more meaning to it. I've always, if you can't kind of tell by the hobbies I've mentioned in the career path, I've just been interested in public service.
Yeah.
So I just look for little ways here and there that I can continue to tack on little, notches on my public service belt, whether it be through fundraising for private causes or, the military or volunteer fire department or, what have you. It's just always kind of been a calling in my life, I guess, that I've felt driven to accomplish.
I think that is so awesome. And you definitely have a servant's heart for sure in all the things that you do in your life. And it's such an honor to talk with you and all the amazing ways that you give back to society. It's really awesome. Really, really awesome. Jonathan, so how did you find the National Spine Health Foundation? How did you find us?
So once I got hooked up with the Ironman Foundation, it occurred to me that there was probably, a spine health foundation as well that I could get involved with and do some work with, So I reached out, went on your webpage, saw the stories, listened to some of the podcasts and was like, man, I wish I'd known about this a long time ago. And reached right out that night, there's no question at all. It was right up my alley, I guess. And, again, just one more way to help folks out. Because like we said, it's just, even within the medical industry, with my own mom, the intricacies of it, I guess, just don't really get discussed that often, despite, the high, diagnosis rates, like you've mentioned.
Yeah. Well, we're thrilled to have you as part of our community and look forward to collaborating more in fun and exciting ways. And we'll be cheering you on with all your marathon work and definitely want to hear how it goes. So April's right around the corner. That's so cool. I definitely
It is. Yeah, it's really close. And thanks for having me, Rita. I've really appreciated, the time and I hope, listeners can get something out of this. If it even helps one person, experiencing kind of what I experienced to get to a fix sooner, whatever that fix means for them, that would be really fantastic. And on the Ironman Foundation stuff, if anyone's interested in, this, you hear a calling to do something similar, just look up my name, Jonathan Carter, Ironman Foundation on Google. It'll bring you right to my page. And you've got my whole story there. And, feel free to reach out for the National Spine Health Foundation too. My information, I think, will be through the website as well.
Yep.
If you can reach out through their comment box.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. Just again, such an honor to talk to you. So inspired by your resilience. Wow, what a great story. And I can't wait to keep in touch. I can't wait to see where you go from here. It's amazing. And I'm sure your doctors do too. You're the poster child in so many ways. And I mean that in the best way possible. Jonathan, thank you for sharing your story with such clarity and purpose. Your journey reminds us that spine conditions don't always begin with a single event, and that recovery is both physical and psychological. We are so grateful for your service and for your willingness to help others learn from your experience. At the National Spine Health Foundation, we believe deeply in providing hope through shared stories and trusted education. Millions of people live with spine-related pain, and it can feel isolating, but you're not alone. To hear more stories of spinal champions and to access spine health resources, visit us at spinehealth.org. Thank you for listening.